Fix errors, waste, and issues in a couple of clicks. Get alerted whenever you're off track. Sign up at trueclicks.com.
Wix Studio, the platform for agencies and enterprises to manage clients and projects with max efficiency, sharing Wix's SEO tech to help you drive growth.
Hello. Thanks for the introduction, Becky. And I'm Yvie, and I'm here to chat about how to use AI to help build your winning content plan. So what you're going to learn in this session is, first of all, how to set up your keyword research, and then how to do a bit of brainstorming with AI essentially, and then also how to actually put all of that together into a content plan. So let's get started. Now, full disclosure, there's loads of different tools I could have focused on for this presentation, but there's quite a lot to go into just with ChatGPT, so that's what I'm going to focus on today. So, building your plan from start to finish. Obviously, every SEO knows that the first step to doing any sort of content planning is to do your keyword research. Now, there's a few different ways that you can start to do this, and a few different ways that you can start to sort of look at your topics, your overarching topics. One of those ways is to actually use ChatGPT to help give you those topics. Very broad prompt right there to get that topic list. Now, I'm going to get into specifics on prompting a little bit later down in the presentation, but for this purpose, I've just essentially given ChatGPT a very broad prompt to say, please give me some overarching topics around SEO. The other way to do this is to do the old school way of just going through your website or your competitive websites to pull out the top level overarching topics that those sites cover currently and that you want to cover in your marketing plan. So what you then will want to do is actually use ChatGPT to build out those overarching topics into actual keyword research. So you're going to go and start going through and asking it to give you keyword lists based on every overarching topic that you've got. Now, there is a load of different topics that you're going to get back and a load of different keywords that you're going to get back. So you're going to want to validate that before you start to really dig into that data, right? So you're going to see a load of different prompts here. Don't worry about that. I will go into that in a little bit. But essentially what you're going to want to do is once you've pulled the list of keywords from ChatGPT, you're going to want to use a tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush or any other tool that will help you validate that data essentially. And you're going to want to push that list into that tool to essentially get all of the search volume data back. Now, there is a tool that will help you make this process a little bit simpler, which is called rose.com. And within that tool, you can essentially plug all of this together. So you can plug ChatGPT into the tool, you can plug the Ahrefs API into this tool, and it's essentially Excel with all the data plugged in, and it will just make the process a lot smoother. But once you've validated your data, that's obviously not the end of the keyword building process. So you've got your top level terms, but you're going to want to build that list of terms out. So within Ahrefs, what you're going to want to look at first is longer tail searches. So there's two different areas to do that with. Firstly, the question-based searches. This is particularly important to understand how your users are searching when they're using question-based queries. So essentially you would go into matching terms on Ahrefs and just pull out the questions that users are asking, and you just simply pull out that list and add it to your data. And the second thing that you want to do when it comes to long tail searches is go back into matching terms and then add in a word count. So you've essentially got word count 4 or 5 words per query to the maximum, and that will essentially give you the really long tail stuff that people search for here. Now, the reason why you're looking at this specifically is because this really niches down into the type of content that people are searching for. You can obviously look at broader terms, and you're going to want to include that as part of your content planning process, but it's the really niche stuff that starts to get really important, because that's where sort of lower down the marketing funnel your customers are going to be. So they're going to start asking more kind of product specific questions, service specific questions, and that's why this is really important. So the thing you're going to want to do next is weed out the irrelevant stuff from this list. So when I originally did this, I did a lot of keywords around content. You would not believe the amount of random stuff that was in my list. For example, protein content in chicken. Not really what you want for this purpose. So you'd want to go in and just essentially push this data into ChatGPT again and say, please go and essentially weed out all the irrelevant stuff. Like, for example, I didn't want to talk about jobs, didn't want to talk about food. So, just weed all of that out so I don't have to manually go through this list and do it myself. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is categorize your list. You will all know that having a list of keyword research is one thing, but actually categorizing that list down is where it gets really useful, because you're not going to create content for every single keyword that you have. You're not going to create a page for every single keyword that you have. You're going to create content based on content topics and clusters. So this is where you want to essentially categorize your content down into categories, subcategories, and then go a little bit deeper and include intent and also your target audience, because every brand will have multiple different personas. So it's really important to make sure that you've actually got all of that down when it comes to your keyword list as well. Now, what I would recommend here is to manually categorize 10% of your keyword list. And the reason why is because you've got to actually teach the AI what it is that you want. So essentially, if you categorize 10% of your list, you can then feed that 10% into the AI tool and say, here's my list. Please pay attention to all the categories that I have categorized this down by. And then what I'm going to do is feed the empty data to you, and you're going to go away and then categorize that based on what I've already told you. 10% of the list is because that gives you a decent amount of information to give to the tool without kind of going overboard or giving too little information to it. So what it then does is go away and categorize your list just like that. Okay, now we're going to go into a little bit more on prompting. So as an example, prompt number 1, I've got here, give me 5 content ideas specifically relating to finding your target audience to help tailor your marketing strategy and directly speaking to this audience. Very vague, very broad. So if you don't worry about reading that, if you actually were to read this, it's quite vague, quite a vague output. It's not very specific to any kind of brand. It's not very specific to what you're looking for. So therefore, when it comes to prompting, it's really important to do something much more specific. So you're going to want to give the engine something that has more information. So I tend to say, think about what, who, where, and then also the brand type. So what is it that you're looking for? Who are you targeting? Where do they find their information? And what kind of brand is it that this person works for, essentially? So you're not always going to include all of this information, obviously, in your prompting, but that's an example of something that would just be a bit more specific. So I've taken the same prompt and essentially built that out from before and added a target audience as well as a bit around what their objectives might be to essentially give them, give the engine a bit more information on what it is that this person is looking for, essentially. So the response, again, don't worry about reading that, but the response comes back a lot more specific to what it is that I'm looking for or that person is looking for. And as you can also see, it's longer, so there's actually more detail in it as well. So the next thing to think about is, how are you going to use that to brainstorm? So taking that exact same prompt and making a very tiny change in terms of, rather than 5 content topics, I've gone, give me 30 succinct content ideas. So what you can see here is a lot more information, but a lot more condensed, which is quite nice and much more digestible. Now, you're going to notice that when you're doing prompts, you're going to have to do a bit of successive prompting because this is not exactly what I wanted. So I went in and said, now actually, can you organize this into a table to help me build this into a content calendar? Unfortunately, it decided it didn't want to work with the correct calendar year. So I had to do another bit of successive prompting to tell it, do it for this calendar year do it in a table format, and then it came back with what I actually wanted. So there's always a bit of kind of tweaking when it comes to prompting. Now, what you want to do next is obviously taking that data that we talked about before when it comes to keywords research, and actually taking that data to build out your content plan. So where you've got your categorized data, an example prompt would be, please organize this data into a content calendar and use a specific target audience, and please prioritize it by search volume, for example, so that I get my highest priority content topics up first in the content calendar, and create it in a calendar format, same as before. Now, for those of you who really paid attention, you will have noticed I actually made a mistake there because I gave it 2 target audiences, which of course confused it. So this is what you want to sort of check is essentially what we've come out with first is it's gone and taken away loads of information for business owners. And that's because within the data, I had some business owner target audiences, whereas I told it in the prompt to only look at marketing directors. So the thing to do here is, obviously I did a successive prompt and then took that out. But the thing to do here is to potentially look at sectioning your prompting down a little bit and essentially looking at specific target audiences at different times, because every target audience will want a different bit of content, essentially. They're not going to be looking for the same information. Okay, so let's talk about the do's and don'ts of prompting. So what you do want to do is be very specific with your prompts and provide context. So if you think about it this way, your AI tool is essentially like a new employee to your company. They don't know anything about you. They don't know anything about the company. So you need to teach it what you want it to know in order to help it give you the information that you want. So in order to do that, you need to give it as much context as possible. And it's the same as if you had a new employee, you would need to give them as much context as possible to actually be able to perform their job. What you don't want to do is make them really broad. You saw at the start of the presentation, there were a few very broad prompts. Broad means vague, so you'll end up getting very vague output back. And that's obviously not what you want. You want really specific output, an output that will actually help your brand. Do think about your target audience and help the tool understand it as well. The more you help the tool understand your target audience, again, the more specific you can get about the content that you're planning on creating. Don't use the exact same prompts as other people. Now, there's a caveat here. A little while ago, there were lots of people putting posts out on LinkedIn and X and platforms like that saying, here's a list of 5 prompts that you should use for X, Y, Z. Now, when it comes to doing a data-driven job, that might work. But when it comes to content planning, you're going to end up with very similar content to these people. So you don't really want to do that. And that's why it's really important not to use the same information as what they've put out there. Do make sure you're tweaking your prompts when you're not getting the response you need. Sometimes you get very random responses. So just tweaking and testing things always makes things a little bit easier in terms of getting the output that you want. Don't give up and feel like you have to do the job manually if your prompts aren't working. If you tweak your prompts a little bit for 5 to 10 minutes, you're still going to have way more time to do other things than if you tried to do the job manually, because it likely will take you hours instead. As I said before, make sure you're testing your prompts to see what works best. I do a bit of A/B testing to see what the output is like with my prompting. And don't get overwhelmed by the amount of information that's out there. There's lots of information of people trying to tell you how to prompt, just like I did here today. Just test and see what works best for you, and you'll just be able to get to a place where you're able to do this really easily. And finally, here's the obligatory slide of a cat, which also signals the end of my talk. So, thanks very much.
Demand sphere. Limitless visual insights from the SERPs. Unlimited dashboards and users. Easy to use and easy to scale your growth to new levels.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.